couple things for tonight. One is for those folks that aren't council members, very much thank you for taking some time out of your evening to spend some time with us. We have a few citizens that aren't on boards or commissions that are here to understand what uncivil behavior is and how to exhibit that.
Practice session.
And there are microphones at every table. When you see the light on, that means it's live. And if you do have a question or a comment that you're going to share with Evan later on, please speak into the microphone. So that's my one comment. Councilmember and Mayor Pro Tem Bruce Beckman earlier has seen Evan, and so he's going to provide us with an introduction this evening.
Evan Abbott is the Director of Organizational Development and Learning with Mountain States Employees Council. He holds a bachelor's degree in psychology from Arizona State University and a master's degree in industrial and organizational psychology from the University of Colorado at Denver. In addition, he holds a senior professional in human resources certification. In his 13 years at Mountain States, Evan has led professional workshops on a variety of topics, including generations in the workplace, motivation and engagement, change, transition management, the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, as well as various topics related to leadership and supervisory skills. He consults with members of Mountain States about issues relating to training, organizational development, and strategic management. In addition, Evan teaches courses in research methods, psychology, and organizational behavior in the College of Professional Studies at Regis. And just some personal comments. I heard Evan at CML earlier this year, and it really struck a chord with me. I mentioned that as an adult, taking adult-level training courses, this was one of the best courses that I'd ever attended because it best reflected what I thought were some of the problems that we were experiencing in the workplace. Over the years, I had worked in teams and groups and projects, and I had often seen inappropriate behavior, but it was hard to really pin down or put a name on, and sometimes it's subtle, it's uncomfortable, and it's disruptive. And this is what the topic is tonight. I'll bet that Evan presents these examples and you can recognize somebody you know or something you've experienced or maybe something you might have done. All of us deserve to work in a civil situation. Let's listen to Evan and see what he has to say about it.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here. We get to spend a couple hours together. So I guess before we go into content, I guess some housekeeping pieces. We won't do an official break. I just like to operate with the ground rule of suffering is optional. So yeah, it is kind of nice. So if you are in need of a beverage, food in the back, standing up and stretching, using the restroom, whatever that might be, there's no hall pass. You don't need to raise your hand. You don't need to sit and suffer in silence. We're all adults, so let you manage that on your own. Mountain States Employers Council, City of Littleton is a member of Mountain States. We're a not-for-profit 501c6, in case you're not familiar with Mountain States. So we serve about 3,200 member organizations across Colorado, Wyoming, Arizona, Utah, Mountain States region. We provide services on the employer side of the business. So we've got a lot of attorneys who work at Mountain States. I'm not an attorney. So no, maybe give a little legal reference here and there, but no attorney here. My background's psychology and organizational development. We counsel around human resources, do a lot of training. So that's how, sometimes I speak at conferences around this topic. I'll give you a little bit of history of that in a moment. But there you go. There's a little bit of Mountain States and who we are and what we do. And really, at the end of the day, we try to help make sure the employer-employee relationship is a good one. And try to make you the best employer you can be. So certainly as a government entity, city entity, and it's not even just your employees that you're held accountable to, but your citizenry that you're held accountable to. So hopefully this content is even that much more applicable for you. So yeah, we are going to spend some time with the idea of incivility. You do have a notebook and some handout materials there. So there's some PowerPoints on the front end and a little article on the back end of that. So please feel free to dive into that as much as you would like. Take notes, doodle in them, put them under your pillow, learn through osmosis, whatever works best for you. and you won't offend me if I see anybody writing or taking notes. Also, I get a little bit more time here than I got at CML, so my intention is also there'll be a few stopping points where it's not just me as the big talking head in the front of the room and try to break you up into some small groups or have some large, I just got a look from a few people of, you're going to make us talk to each other? Yes, we have some opportunity to even discuss things here. And it's my hope that to the level of your comfort, you can share some examples or some thoughts as we move through some of the material and participate at the level that's most comfortable for you. So this topic, just to give you a little bit of the history of my involvement in this topic, if you go in the Wayback Machine to, I want to say correctly that it was January 2011, when Congressperson Giffords was shot in Arizona. I don't know if any of you remember that. The topic of civil discussion came up a lot. You would see it in the media. The big talking heads would be talking about it. You'd see articles in the paper all about it, of civility, incivility, where has political discourse gotten to in the 21st century. So right around that same time, so annually, we do an employment law update for all of our members. So the attorneys start talking about the latest and greatest in employment law, and we always have one non-attorney each year, and that year it was me. And so as I was taking a look at what topic was I going to focus on for that year, incivility and the topic of civility really seemed like a current topic, and I got very interested in it, dove in. I'm a bit of a research geek. You heard in my introduction there that I teach some classes on research methods at Regis University, so I do experience the joy of the Excel spreadsheet. So if there's anybody else in here who just sees all the connections in the universe with a well-constructed Excel spreadsheet, so I will share some data and statistics with you over the course of our time. I like research. So I found a lot of research on the topic and dove in and delivered that presentation for the very first time back at that employment law update. Since then, I have pretty regularly delivered this presentation. I've made some adaptations to it as newer research has come along since then. It's a topic that has struck a chord with many of our members to get a bit of an insight around taking a look at this whole topic, civility, incivility. Whoops. Not sure what happened there. Oh, looks like a computer went to sleep there for a second.
It wasn't by somebody listening to
No.
radio or something. That was by a mentally ill person.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. But the example you gave was due to the hate media and stuff like that.
Exactly. That you started hearing about at that particular point in time. It was a very hot topic of how do we talk to one another in politics. So not necessarily that the shooting happened in that manner, but the whole piece of how political discussion happens really sparked just so much of that conversation. You're exactly right. So after I did that employment law update presentation, had a number of our members then ask me, hey, can you take this to our company, to our employees, and talk to them a little bit about this as well? And I said, sure. So one of the very first times that I took the show on the road, had a client give me a call a couple days beforehand and say, Evan, I got a question from one of our managers that I didn't know how to answer. And so what was the question? And she said, well, one of the managers gave me a call and he asked me, what's incivility? So how did you answer that question? Well, I said it's the opposite of civility. I said, well, that's a very good answer. And she goes, well, that's not the question I didn't know the answer to. Well, what was the other question? Well, she said, well, wouldn't that be uncivility? So why is it uncivil behavior, but incivility in the workplace? Do you have an answer to that question so I can get back to that manager? To which I promptly replied back, no, I do not have an answer for that. That English grammar piece was not my best subject in school. I've since found out that it has something to do with verbs versus adverbs and how the term is being used, un versus in. But maybe you're like me and you didn't get a lot from that particular grammar piece within school. But maybe you've experienced it just a little bit. Everybody's got a boss, right? So maybe as you were getting some instructions or some thoughts from your own boss, somebody higher above you in the food chain, maybe that was delivered with a little bit of tone of voice embedded into it. Maybe you have put out a request for a coworker, a colleague, somebody else that you work with a committee on, and for some help, and they're not quite getting back to you in a timely manner. Maybe, unfortunately, even of us kind of citizens get upset sometimes, and maybe it's a bit of a demeaning or cutting remark from a member of the citizenry. So regardless of the kind of example, you might not know the grammar behind it, but all of those are examples of incivility. So we're talking about these little elements that begin to come up with how we interact with one another on a day in and day out basis. So while the un versus in was not necessarily my best component in school, I did enjoy when we got to study root words. Remember when you got to go back and study the Latin and the Greek roots? So I thought that'd be a great place for me to kind of dive in and try to understand civility and incivility. So at the root of incivility is civitas. So if anybody remembers for me it was 8th grade when we got to study the Latin and Greek roots. Anybody know what the literal definition of civitas means? Anybody know your roots? Civitas, or want to hazard a guess?
City?
It literally means of the city. Of the city. Back in the day, civitas literally meant of the city. So thus we get civilization. To be cityized. To be civilized meant to be cityized. So now, go back to the ancient Greeks, ancient Romans. The thoughts was, you're going to have that higher level of behavior the more you go into the city, more social norms, more social constructs, better ways in which we treat one another the further into the city you go, because who knows what you're going to get when you go out to the country, when you go out to those rural areas, back in the day. Now, many of us would say, 2014, that those two things have flipped. You go further into the city, you never know what kind of behavior you're going to get. You've got to get a certain level of civitas further out into the country. Whether that is a sociological debate or not, we won't get into that here this evening. But we certainly need a certain level of civitas in order to have functional relationships with one another in organizations, whether that be employee, employer, councils, committees, any of those different pieces. When people get together to have a certain level of civitas is how work gets done. But that's not the sexy topic. That's not the topic that gets attention in today's workplace and the media. The stuff that really gets our attention is the stuff that breaks through the tip of the iceberg there. Workplace violence, harassment, bullying has certainly hit the national stage more. Various elements of abuse. Those are the things that hit our radar. Those are the things that we define as important because it's so big and it's so severe. But if you think about this like the principle of an iceberg, that's just the tip of the iceberg breaking through the surface. A good 90% of the iceberg lives underneath the water and is what allows that tip to pop through. So when we're talking about the larger body of what makes up the bigger portion of the iceberg, what we're talking about are things like sarcasm. We're talking about things like demeaning comments, mean jokes, retaliatory behaviors, interrupting, raising voices, those escalating levels of hostility. But we're never going to hear on the 6 o'clock news, supervisor treats employee rudely. It's just not interesting. But it is the stuff that begins to make up how we experience one another in social settings, in workplace dynamics. And lots of research on this topic. If you ask people, do you feel like you're treated rudely at work at least once a week? Asked back in 1998, 25% of us said yes to that question. At least once a week, I feel like I'm treated rudely. Fast forward to 2011, that number had over doubled and has gone up even a little further by the time you get to 2013, that at least over 50% of us say at least once a week, I feel like I'm treated rudely at work. Many of us might say, heck, that's a daily basis sort of thing. Now, if the numbers don't resonate for you on this, there's lots of fun description in the literature about what are these, what does it mean to be uncivil? So I want to share some of my favorites with you. Death by 1,000 paper cuts. Imagine that one. Get one paper cut, cry about it, you're a baby. And I get to say that because I do cry about the one paper cut. But imagine death by 1,000 of them. If you've ever seen, we're getting close to Halloween, if you've ever seen the Saw movies, and all those things Jigsaw does, all those violent, imagine death by 1,000 paper cuts, just little cut after little cut. Or for the more poetic amongst us, the daily little murders of the soul. If you've ever known somebody who really disliked their job, and you ask them how was work today, and if they've ever said something like, I feel like my soul died a little today. If you've ever had that sort of workplace experience or social experience. Now, I work with attorneys, so in any sort of presentation, I always try to make my one little requisite attorney joke, and they have fun with it. And so, the one that really resonates for me is the idea of being nibbled to death by guppies. Imagine that one, the nibbling and the biting, and how that would feel to die according to those circumstances. And so, if any of this connects for you, how we begin to see incivility show up, the numbers support that it's a growing problem. You look at some of the research around incivility in the workplace. 89% of us say that incivility, how we treat one another in some sort of work dynamic, and certainly you as a council or larger body, you guys are work dynamic. 89% of us say how we treat one another in today's workplace is a serious issue. 78% of us say that it's gotten worse over the past number of years, that there's been this increased escalation. 99% of us say that our own behavior is civil. So I don't know about you, but I have a really hard time connecting those three numbers together. 89% of us say it's a serious problem, 78% of us say that's a serious issue, but less than 1% of us actually do it. So I got, like I said, I'm a numbers guy, and I got really stuck as I landed on these three numbers. How could these three numbers possibly make sense with each other?
The 1% get around.
And that is ultimately where I landed. It must be one guy going from organization to organization causing all the problems. Because it's none of us. We're all part of the 99% who treat each other nicely. It must be somebody else who's engaging in these uncivil little paper cut behaviors, which actually makes this session so much easier, because this is not, I'll tell you right now, this is not the finger-shaking presentation. This is not, you're not going to get any scolding from me about incivility. It must be one guy who just keeps going around, makes our life a little bit easier. We get to talk about somebody else, and it's always so much fun when you can talk about other people's behaviors rather than talking about our own. So, how hard can it really be to track down one guy? So I've shared a few different things about myself here with you. Share another little personal item. I am a television addict. I enjoy my evening television. I really enjoy the crime procedural drama TV shows. My dad's a retired police officer, and so it's like, at one point I thought maybe I wanted to go into the FBI. So it's like CSI, NCIS, Law and Order, Lie to Me, all of those are just great. And you can learn everything you ever needed to know by just watching television. So I figure with all my hours and hours and hours and hours of television viewing, I could apply all those fundamental criminological principles in order to track down one guy. And it didn't take me too long, ultimately did track him down. I want to introduce you to Snarky. This is the guy causing all the problems in today's workplace. All the workplace snark, the cutting comments, the aren't I so witty, little snarky moments. So this is the individual. So that's actually, for the rest of our journey together, we are going to spend some time learning about Snarky. We are going to do some criminal profiling, try to understand his psyche just a little bit more. Who is he? What does he do? Why does he do it that way? We're going to get a chance to take a look at his rap sheet. What are those crimes that he's guilty of? And should we be lucky to be able to incarcerate him, maybe put him through a rehab program? Might we be able to make him a productive member of society again? What are some of those different things we can do to make him a little bit better? So, working in a legal environment, I figured, all right, I'll start with, have the courts ever defined incivility? Have we ever gotten a legal definition of what it is? And couldn't find one. Closest I could come was back in the mid-1960s, Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart made a kind of an infamous quote when he was asked to define pornography. And so this is a Supreme Court justice's definition of pornography. I know it when I see it. That was as far as it went. So, if you're Supreme Court justice, you get to make definitions like this. For pornography, probably works. For incivility, we might have to take this just a bit further. Now, what I could say is maybe we get close here with a definition. Maybe I don't know it when I see it, but I know it when I've been on the receiving end of it. I know it when I've felt it. Any one of us could say, don't necessarily ask me to give you a definition of what's incivility, but I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example of a paper cut that I received just recently. So that probably gets a little bit easier for us, but I didn't want to just leave it here. I really wanted to be able, can I find a definition? So I went back to those TV hours of viewing of those crime procedural drama TV shows. All right, how do they tend to figure out who done it? And in those TV shows, they've got a little, and even in criminology, they've got a little magic trifecta they use to try to identify who done it. What's that little trifecta?
Motive means an opportunity.
Motive means opportunity, right. So if we can have this, motive means opportunity, might there be some sort of parallel with trying to understand incivility? So there is, and I hit a home run on that one, that the kind of the modern day Sherlock Holmes, Dr. Watson of incivility research are two individuals by the name of Christine Pearson and Christine Perath. Back in 2009, they published a book. It was a culmination of a 10-year study about the cost of incivility in the workplace. They documented those sorts of behaviors and what's the bottom line it costs to productivity, engagement. So the book was called The Cost of Bad Behavior. And as part of their research in the field of academia around incivility, they have a definition. So we actually can use this for Snarky's profile. We can begin to take a look at who is he, what's his profile, what are we talking about when we're talking about uncivil behaviors. We're typically talking about behaviors that meet 3 criteria. It's behavior of relatively low intensity, it has an ambiguous intent, and it's in some way a violation of norms. Now we're going to spend some time on each one of these. Behaviors of relatively low intensity. So we can automatically scratch things off like sexual harassment or other variations of harassment. Those are high intensity. There are laws around those sorts of things. Workplace violence, that's high intensity. We can scratch that off the list. So that has its own game, its own rules, its own applications. So when we're talking about incivility, we're talking about behaviors that are relatively low in intensity. So what are some of those things? They're pretty much what you might expect. Maybe you did a bunch of really good hard work and somebody else took the credit for it. There was a nice compliment given out, and somebody said, oh, thank you, I worked hard on that. But you're like, hey, I kind of worked on that too. Maybe somebody leaves you the voicemail that has just a scotch too much tone in it. Certain words are just being emphasized a little too much for you. Maybe some of the gossip mill has gotten going about a decision, about a person, about personalities or personal lives. Maybe some of those things start really to get going. I'm trying to give you some instructions. I'm trying to be helpful, and you keep interrupting me. And that's not, none of us like to be interrupted, right? That's not cool. Maybe the email that has just too much bold and underline and capital letters. It's like, I'm going to really make sure to get my point across. Or you didn't listen to the email, so I guess I'm just going to have to get in your face a little bit more and raise my voice. So I'm just going to shout around that a little bit more. Maybe that'll make you really understand. And occasionally you might need to be put in your place with a belittling comment or two. After you've been here a little bit longer, then you have the right to an opinion. But until you've been here for a couple years, just sit back, let those of us who really know how to do the work really take things over and just learn a little bit, would you? And now you're not listening to me, so I'm going to stomp around and throw a tantrum. I didn't get my way, but that's not my fault. That's your fault. You made me behave like that. Had you just listened to me, I wouldn't have had to have gotten so worked up around this. And now you're trying to call me, but I can see it's you on the caller ID, and I don't want to talk to you. So I'm just going to let that go right on over to voicemail. And now I'm really bored with this discussion, so I now answer the phone or start doing some texting. And so I'm going to show you, I'm going to put you in your place just about how important you are in my world. And now, I really don't like you all that much, so maybe some rumors or some really unfounded things, or maybe, let's just be honest, taking food from the refrigerator that does not belong to you. That is not cool. And now it's like, that wasn't my fault. I'm going to throw you under the bus. You're going to be the one to get in trouble for this, not me. I'm going to leave that crusty oatmeal bowl in the sink, let you clean it up. When did I become office mom? When did I become the workplace one who has to unload the dishwasher, get all that stuff, and leave a mess for other people to clean up? And I'm going to let you know all my snide, witty, aren't I so funny, sarcastic comments. That's just a joke. And I'm standing over you while you try to have a private telephone conversation or leaving the copier jammed for me and other people to fix. Or just, neglecting to say, please, thank you, you're welcome. Or just the one that ticks me off the most, taking the last cup of coffee and not offering to make a new pot. Sorry. I'm okay. I need a drink. All right. Now, I told you that this was not going to be the finger-shaking presentation. And very quickly, this can sound like the finger-shaking presentation. Suddenly, we all have to be perfect all the time with everything that we do, so as not to offend. That's not the point here. What we have to go back to is that death by 1,000 paper cuts concept. The individual one-off, one slight, that's being human. We're going to test a hypothesis here. I'd like you to, I believe this is just a factor of being human. There's my hypothesis. Here's my test. I'd like you to stand up if you've ever done even one of the items I just ranted on about. Own it. Stand up loud and proud. If you have ever done even one of the things I just went on about, stand up. All right, look around the room. We have a room full of human beings in the room. Go ahead and sit back down. All right, so this is not about beating each other up. Are we doing all these things? Have I done any one of these things? Suddenly now I'm being uncivil and that I'm snarky and I need to be taken away and put into handcuffs. The element here is, did I just describe somewhere in totality? For the most part, that was like, no, that's not the one-offs. That's our daily interactions with one another. That's the kind of environment where snarky likes to put down roots and call home. That's the death by 1,000 paper cuts. That's the being nibbled to death by guppies. It's the little things that then begin to add up, the cutting comments time and time again. That's what we're talking about here within civility. So these behaviors that are relatively low in intensity, but you start to aggregate them, and we begin to have issues, and snarky starts showing up a little bit more. So component number 2, each one of those behaviors has an ambiguous intent. Why the person did what he or she did is open to some interpretation. There's some gray space within this. Did I leave the copier jammed because I was in a rush to get to this next meeting and the thing was beeping and I didn't know what to do about it? Or did I leave the copier jammed to send a message? You are always running some insanely long copy jobs, and the rest of us are having to constantly wait for your use of, I guess, what is your copier. It's about time you learned what it's like to have to wait. So now what I'm really doing is disguising my aggression. So the innocent comment, the voicemail with too much tone, the interrupting, the rumor, whatever it might be. Maybe it was innocent, but maybe there's actually a message I'm trying to get you to really understand. And now if you respond poorly to it, what snarky loves is he gets to blame the victim. Wow, sensitive much? Paranoid? Think the world's out to get you? Got to think everything's about you? I was just having a bad day. Don't take everything so personally. Snarky gets to make his paper cut, but not have to own it. And that's the joy of uncivil, low-intensity behaviors, is that open to interpretation piece. All those different ways that maybe a message is trying to be sent. So in a moment, I'm going to have you break up into some small groups, or even just maybe some clusters of convenience here, and we'll discuss a few of these that maybe come up in some environment you've ever been in. Now, the third component is each one of these behaviors is in some way, shape, or form a violation of norms. Now, what are norms? Norms are not laws. Governing agencies, municipalities create laws. Norms aren't even policy. Organizations set policies. Norms are those operating social agreements that we create with one another. You have norms in your household about how work gets done. Who takes care of what and when? You have norms in your workspaces about how we interact with one another and how things happen. Sometimes those norms are very explicit. They're overtly stated to each other. So I'll give like a work example and a home world example. Work example. You start in on a new job, and the person who's walking you around starts running you through the rules. Now, you won't find these in a book anywhere, but they're just trying to help make sure it's a successful experience for you. All right, you're kind of the new kid on the block. See Evan over there? Evan's kind of senior on the team. Even though he's not the lead, he really likes to have his opinion asked. So if you want to be in good in the department and be in good with Evan, make sure you ask his opinion about how you come up on things. That'll help grease the wheels a little bit. Help yourself to the Starbucks coffee in the kitchen. That's what it's there for. And here are just kind of the general rules of the game. Your personal world. You remember how when you met that significant other, that person you love so much, and you're on your way to meet the parents for the first time. And that person you love so much is kind of running you through the rules. All right, when we get to the house, take your shoes off right when you go in, because mom and dad just got new carpeting. They're too polite. They won't ask you to take their shoes off, but you'll earn big points if you take your shoes off. So take the shoes off. Just give dad a nice firm handshake. He's old school. He really likes that. Make good eye contact with him. You'll be in good there. Mom's going to be buzzing around the kitchen. She'll look like she needs help. If you offer help, she'll say yes, but she'll be mad. Keep out of her kitchen. Do not help mom. Even if she looks like so just don't do it, okay? You got the rules? Great, let's go. It's like, oh, thank you so much. Life is good. Now, there are other kinds of norms that we experience in relationships, social worlds, workplaces, and they're called implicit norms. Those norms exist, Those rules exist, but nobody ever tells you those rules. How do we tend to learn those rules? Through making a mistake, through breaking them, through stepping in it. Whatever label you want to put to it, suddenly we make a mistake. And that's when somebody says, why didn't you ask my opinion? What are you doing helping yourself? Why didn't you put any money in the coffee kitty? Well, I didn't know I was supposed to put any money. Well, there's a can there with a dollar sign on it. What do you think? The stuff just grows on trees? Well, nobody told me I had to put money. Well, it does grow on trees, but that's not the point. Nobody told me I'm supposed to put money in the can. You go to the house, you go to the, you shouldn't have engaged Uncle Joe on that topic. Well, everybody knows you don't discuss religion and politics when you first meet family members, right? You just don't do that. It's common sense. All these implicit norms. So now when we're talking about incivility, this is where we begin to get a little bit of a problem. What might make me survive and thrive in one organization, what the norms are in one municipality, one city, one job, one shift, might get me put on the most wanted list in another organization, on another shift. That's not the way we do that here. That's not how we do that in this organization. That's not how we do this in this household. So what is that universal list of what's okay and what's not? There is no universal list of norms for social groups, operating groups, organizations. And we get that call. And typically it's guised under, can somebody come in and teach my employees how to be professional? Can somebody come in and teach what's okay to do at work, what's not okay? There's no such thing. Because of that, what's okay in one place might not be okay somewhere else. So sometimes when we're thinking about incivility, we have to think about it from the perspective of respect. And incivility tends to be behavior that disrupts mutual respect at work. And we might have to have some discussion about how that looks in relation to our norms. Always better if we can take norms and move them from implicit into explicit. Can we have that conversation about, before we start this meeting, here's what's expected around anybody who participates. I'm really making sure that everybody knows what are the rules of conduct. As I enter somebody into a group, what are the things that are okay versus what are the things that aren't? Beginning to have some discussion around that. So we have these three different components. What is incivility? Behavior that's relatively low in intensity, has an ambiguous intent, and is in violation of some sort of norm. So this is where I would like to the level of your comfort, get all you just a little bit involved. So I'd like you to take a moment and form some clusters of convenience. Groups of 3 or 4, hopefully so you don't have to move around, maybe shift some chairs here and there, and have a little bit of discussion. Whether it's here, if you really want to be vulnerable, here's a behavior I've seen that fits Evan's definition, or rather Pearson and Parath's definition, or when I was in this other job, or this other employer, or was on this other committee, or in this other thing, here's some examples. Maybe some of you might just even have some generalized. What are some elements that push your button that, no one's going to build a federal case out of it, but it's a paper cut. Based on this definition now, where might you go with some of your own examples? And then I'll ask for some volunteers to share some of the examples you discussed in your small groups. Okay? So I'll give you a few minutes, and I'll just kind of check the pulse of where some conversations are going, and then I'll pull you back in. All right. Clusters of convenience. This is a cluster of convenience.
This is death.
Any examples that you feel fit the model that you've personally run across or that you know for you would be an example of statement? You're right. Either way.
saying.
The a lot of emailers stuff here. I mean, just it's just, and a lot of times it seems like it's people just jamming stuff out. It's not taking time. Just to give an example, I mean, I work with never says please. I'm watching you so much just like, and it's not like it's a big deal, but that's what I'm saying. If you don't mind doing that, I appreciate it. Yeah, it's just, it never hurts. So I try to do that with my staff. I probably don't do as much as I should. It's just, that also
I will be honest, I'm becoming more sensitized to that. I don't know how it's the other area would send you without. I get the boss's office. So what do you do? No, it's like, today I walked in a doctor, some of my drugs, and I'm doing samples now, and I've been out of the office 3 or 4 times, and I have some interest, but they, you know, they're not ready to. So now I have them. July, I said, we'll just try it out. Here I got all this stuff. They're not just racing around. Blocks away because all these hospital lots are going in. Standing there waiting for everybody to finish this.
Give you a couple more minutes.
Yes, you do. And this is your power trip for
yeah, exactly. And whenever they say that, that's exactly what it's your sandbox. I'm going to be there.
There's not going to be a larger share. Because I know that would actually be backward. No,
Years ago,
where I
It's the thing Michael's been doing with where he says, don't say we've always done it that way, or don't say we already tried that, or because that's part of that same thing. It's just a way to shut the other person up, as if it's as important. We've always done it that way. I have more experience than you.
All right, if you can take a moment to wrap up your current example and come on back as a group.
It's that power trip, adding the power trip to the content.
Come on back. Come on back. Yes, sir. No worries. Thanks for letting me know. I think that is a very honest piece of, as technology, as we become, I'm trying to go less paper. So I bring my tablet with me to meetings. And certainly in the day of pen and paper, it's a lot easier to see that somebody's paying attention, taking notes, because you can see notes or at least doodling. So if somebody's on their tablet or on their phone, are they taking notes or are they playing Angry Birds? You don't know. Amazing the interpretation, though. You don't. And I think that's sometimes where we start to write stories. Yeah. Come on back. Come on back. Oh, sure. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. But it really
I
did.
like what you said about the
about the individual, sure. Sure. But it was such a great, the conversation that came afterwards, such a great example of the topic.
is going to use their little level of influence and authority to far beyond what
Exactly.
needed.
All right, come on back.
Expected,
So, would anybody mind sharing an example that your group talked about? Anybody willing to put your example out there? Yeah.
What we were talking about is a lot of
So you certainly do get the...
You're afraid to broach any subject.
Well, behavior, certainly in the world of today's media, just in general, the power of the soundbite, that how I say something could now be tracked forever in a particular period of time. I think it's heightened our awareness in one sense, but has also paralyzed us in another. How can I do this the best that I can? And so I really do believe from this place of the, if we have a culture, if we have an environment where we know that the one-off is really the one-off, we are more forgiving of the one comment. But if I can now run a string of sound bites or begin to go any litany of examples, suddenly that's taken out of context loses its oomph. So really thinking about, all right, we're all going to have that human moment there, here and there with each other. It's really, though, is trying to minimize it becoming the aggregate. That's an excellent observation, certainly in your guys' world too, of that, literal politics, literal, government versus, the politics, the politics in quotes in organizations.
We also added to that's what increases pent-up anger, because you feel you can't say anything, so you go home, and every day you're feeling you should be able to say something, and because you can't, you get really angry after a while because you can't say what you feel you should be able to say.
And I would really encourage, if this is a journey you all want to go on together, that really challenging that issue of, but I can't say that. Is it that I can't say it? Or might there be other ways to say it? Not, being PC about it, and suddenly we get derogatory with that, but are there ways that I can learn good collaborative communication? That we as an organization, that suddenly now City of Littleton has the reputation of its city council meetings, and it's known for how that's managed in a very civilized manner, that we can talk about really hot button topics, things that are hitting the media at the national stage or even just at the little local stage, but how we manage those conversations with each other in our forum, there are norms around that, about the kind of discussion, and you can have a dissenting opinion, and it can be dissenting and still be civil. It can be dissenting and still have that level of civilization with each other. Yeah. Other examples anybody talked about in your groups?
Talked about generational differences.
Such as?
Well, I work in a corporation. I work in an office where there's 20s and 30-somethings, and then there's me. And others like me.
So up in the 40s?
Yeah. And so I told the guys, I thought about it this morning. If there's a young guy, he's going through some marital problems, but he's not working 8 hours a day because his life is getting in the way. And I said to myself, what happened to the 8-hour workday? I need things done. You're a junior person. You have to do the work for me. And so it rubs me a little bit. I'm old-fashioned, I guess, and I like the idea of working and getting paid for it. But beyond that, we have other people who have different attitudes about entitlement. I like to work less and get paid more, and their work hours are different than mine. We have new technology that allows people to work at home.
Yep.
They're getting the same work done, but it doesn't fit my norm of a traditional workday.
It's so nice of you to just own that I get that this is them and here's me. Small factoid, complete tangent. I speak on generations quite frequently. So, the millennial generation, the 20-somethings and early 30-somethings, 80 million of them. 80 million. Within the next 10 years, they will be the majority workforce demographic. The expectations they're bringing. Now, that doesn't mean suddenly we're going to have all these massive changes, but the evolution that has happened from one generation to the next with every generation that has ever been over time, we're going to see it, and we're going to see it a heck of a lot more. And in a recent survey that I read, one of the biggest things millennials look for in an environment is work-life flexibility. Work-life blending is the term they use. My generation, Generation X, called it work-life balance. Millennials, it's not about balancing the two. It's about a blend of the two. Why can't I take some hours during the day? I like to bike, and now I'm going to take a couple hours during the day and go on a bike ride, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to be working for 3-4 hours tonight, in the evening or this weekend. So you're going to get your 40 hours from me. You might even get 50 or 60. It's just not going to look like how it typically looks. And that is certainly every generation, as one generation enters, we get this generational bump. But that millennial generation, they are the next tidal wave that is coming. Generation X, my generation was really small, only something like 47 million of us, 43 million. Baby boomers were 72 million. Hey, there was a cheer in the back around the small generation. Oh, I thought it was small. Oh, yay that they're a small generation. Yay, woo, go Gen X. Baby boom, 72 million. So we got this dip. So lots of other factoids there with generations, but that is certainly these bumping expectations could be perceived as uncivil. You are interacting in a way that is not the norm that I was raised on about what it means to go to work, what it means to interact with a group or a team. Any other examples? Anybody shared in your small groups that you'd be willing to? Yeah.
Yeah, we had the snarky person sitting at the desk that's the watchkeeper and very impressed with the power they have, and you can't get through them. You can't get past them, and they may not actually be representative at all of what you are about or what the company's about, but you can't get past them.
Oh, so you're talking about like the receptionist that has the keys to the door, or
we don't need that here. We don't need that here. Oh no, we'll just throw them away. And that may not be true at all.
All right, so now let's play with that. Let's play with that as an example of incivility. So if somebody gets turned away, is the world going to end because of that? No. In most likely cases, no. So relatively low intensity. Let's play with intent on this. So we always try to be our best selves and try to enlighten ourselves. I'm going to give you permission right now to darken yourself. So you don't have to enlighten yourself right now. I give you permission to darken yourself. I am that gatekeeper. And here you come, selling your wares, whatever those wares might be, at my door. And I'm shooing you away. If you go to your darkest intentions behind that, finish the statement. I'm shooing you away. I'm treating you so poorly because...
Because I told you to, because I want you to do your work.
Because I'm going to exert that, I want you to. I'm going to exude that power over you. And because I told you, I told you. So there you go. There's one of my intentions. What is my intention? I'm that gatekeeper, and now that's perceived as incivility. What's a disguised aggression behind that?
Well, it could be insecurity.
Maybe. If I let you in the door, you now have this technology you want to sell that could replace me, or you have this thing that you want to do that now I might lose my status just a little bit. Everybody else in this organization puts me down because I live here on the totem pole. Guess what, buddy? You don't supervise me. You aren't ahead of me. So you are somebody I get to shoo away. So I'm exerting my power about shooing you away. There, I felt good. I got to exercise some strength today. Boom. Booyah.
Or you're a complete idiot and you deserve to be thrown out the door.
Absolutely. And that is, last thing I want to see you again. And so bye-bye. Bye. Now, all right, so there we go. We got some darkened out of us here. Your more enlightened self. The individual is not trying to be uncivil. I'm not trying to be the gatekeeper. I'm not trying to be that difficult individual at the door, whatever the at the door might mean. The reason I'm saying no is I am under directives from my own supervisor. Now, the last thing I'm going to do is throw that boss under the bus and say, my boss told me I got to kick you out. I'm just going to give you the no.
And no means no. After 15 times, we're done.
Maybe this isn't personal against you. I've had so many other people try to not take no for an answer that you got to be on the receiving end of my tone right now. And this wasn't about you. This was, I'm done. I'm fried. That's why you're getting my tone. You had raised your hand with an example.
Yeah, I guess when we talk about intent, and we talk about really like the technology. So we have email.
Yeah.
And somebody maybe disagrees with the decision that's made. Rather than communicate directly with the decision maker, they take it upon themselves to share their thoughts with the entire department.
Here we go.
Kind of stir the pot.
Here we go. Chris and I are having a little email exchange that was, we've got a bit of a disagreement. He's the fire chief. I'm the chief of something else. And he would like something done one way, I'd like it done something another way. We're slipping out of using our best words, some very short sentences with periods. And suddenly I'll own this. Suddenly Chris says something that I really don't like. And so now I decide to do a CC all department. I decide to do a CC all city. I decide to do a CC mayor. So now, and darken yourselves for a little bit. Why did I just CC everybody else? Why did I just CC the mayor? All right, I now need to build an army. I'm going to build an us and them. All right, there we go. I need to build my army here. Other and darkened reasons I sent that email.
Shift the blame.
I am not getting in trouble on this one. I want everybody to know, since I'm pushing this out here first, that's his fault. He who copies first is high ground, right? Right? Because I got nothing to hide. Since I CC'd first, that obviously means I'm initiating this. We talk about being transparent. I was just being transparent. You are taking this too sensitively. I thought everybody else might like to weigh in on where we are in this decision. All right. So that's all flushed out. Enlighten yourself for a second. I copied the mayor, I CC'd the department, not because I was trying to throw Chris under the bus, not because I'm trying to not get blamed. The reason I did that was
I want to see a change.
I do feel strongly about this, want to see a change, and I know other people might have some other feedback that maybe I'm not communicating clearly. And I want to try to, this is the only tool I know about maybe how to get some of that other feedback out there to be able to give Chris. Maybe not the most elegant, but it certainly wasn't meant to build an army. Other reasons why maybe I sent the CC or included the boss on the copy.
Additional pressure on the recipient.
It could be. Now, somebody could argue that that's even going over to snarky, that's escalating to hostility, the pressure piece. Now, if I'm going from an enlightened place, maybe it's not pressure, but it is, I feel I'm out of my depth of managing this conversation from here. It's getting hostile. I don't know how to make it less hostile. I need to bring somebody else into the equation. I'm attempting, it might be a poor attempt, but I'm honestly trying to attempt damage control maybe by doing this. Now, copying the whole department, I don't know if I can spin that one, but bringing in another individual, maybe so.
I mean, and this is a little bit off the point, but I mean, the one problem I do have with a lot of the way business is conducted today is the phone call is done. You can't call anybody personally anymore, and you can't meet anybody face to face and just express your differences. Let's see if we can't talk this out.
Yeah.
No, it's got to be an email, and everybody's very brave on email. And when you get face to face, you really don't have a stance. But you can't say that, so now all of a sudden it gets CC'd around and you go, okay.
We're going to talk about technology a little bit later.
It,
We're going to talk about technology a little bit later, so we're going to circle back to that. While not built into this presentation physically, it's a concept. If I go back to my psychology roots that I want to throw out there that I think is really helpful in understanding this whole idea of intent. Because ultimately, that's one of the most dangerous ones right there. How do we ever really, truly know somebody's intent? And that oftentimes is the factor that weighs us between, was somebody being uncivil or did they make an honest mistake? Were they being human? So my grandfather was very big in my world when I was first growing up, and some of his different principles and thoughts and his value system. So there was a value that was of high importance to him, the idea of integrity. A very big word, right? So, here's this value. Thank you very much. Here's this value, integrity. Now, within how we think about our values lead to our attitudes. So I have this thing called integrity as a value. It leads to an attitude. You shouldn't do business with somebody. You shouldn't have people in your life who don't have integrity. So here's this should that we develop around each other. And our attitudes influence our behaviors. So my grandfather had one behavior that he purported he could gauge somebody's integrity within the first 2 seconds of meeting them, and he passed that down to me. One behavior. Nice handshake, eye contact. Nice firm handshake. That's how you communicate integrity. Somebody gives you, though, the wet fish. He shook his head for a little bit too, and then ultimately, heavies, right? Right? That's like, obviously don't have integrity there. Now, if you have ever gone in for the handshake, and somebody shakes your hand a scotch of a second before you're ready for your hand to be shook. And so they come in and they shake your hand, grab my hand. It's like, oh, I'm giving a wet fish. And it's like, oh, can we do that again? If you've ever felt the need to reshake somebody's hand, can we do that again? So then you go and it's like, oh, thank you very much. And you both have a polite little giggle around it. What is that giggle? It is called the fundamental attribution error. So you might not have realized you were making it, but you caught it in the moment. Because the subtext here is, I'm giving you a wet fish. I don't want you to write the story I would write about you if you were to give me the wet fish. So I want a do-over. I have integrity. I have a nice firm handshake. You, my friend, are an early handshake giver. So fundamental attribution error. When somebody engages in a behavior that we don't like, we are more inclined to attribute it to their personhood, to their personality, to who they are. We engage in that same behavior, we are more inclined to attribute it to the circumstance we're in. You give me a wet fish, you don't have integrity. I give you a wet fish, I wasn't ready for my hand to be shook. Now, if that's not connecting for you, think about driving. Somebody cuts you off in traffic. Oh, we instantly know everything we need to know about that other driver. Who they are, where they got their license, their family lineage, their thoughts they think they know about road ownership. Got you on everything, instantly. I get honked at for inadvertently cutting somebody off in traffic. Oh, that's because you were flying in my blind spot. You were playing wingman. You shouldn't be passing on the right. I got distracted by the sign flipper dude over there. The sun was in my eyes. Cell phone went off. All these circumstantial things that reinforce for me I'm a good driver. I was put in a bad situation. I'm sure our friend Chris over there has heard every situation in the books around somebody being a good driver. But now here's this instance. So fundamental attribution error can come up a lot when we're thinking about incivility. You know, here's this uncivil, snarky, mean, evil, terrible person. They must die because they forgot to take the dish out of the sink, because the copier's jammed. So I think the computer occasionally gets sleepy. So that's one of these elements that we really need to think about when we're thinking about incivility. Might I be falling victim to the fundamental attribution error and ascribing somebody's intent that wasn't there? So even thinking about, can I give somebody else the situational benefit of the doubt that I'm hoping they give me on any number of occasions when my ugly humanness shows up in a given moment? Intentionally or not. Doesn't excuse my behavior, but might it provide an opportunity for a little bit more civil discussion? So before we move forward, just thoughts or questions around anything up to this point? Yeah.
Well, you had that bar graph calling out incivility has increased from 98
Yeah.
to 2011, whatever. 200%.
It's double, yeah.
And of course immediately pops out. I was hoping it was your next slide. I was going to say, why? What do you attribute it to?
That's what we're going to get to here next. You are thinking ahead.
Just needed to wait 10 slides.
That's okay. So now, as we really do try to move forward here and try to understand why do we see this rise in incivility? Why does Snarky behave the way that he does? We need to try to understand him just a little bit better. Now, some people think that he was maybe wasn't loved enough as a child. Maybe he was raised in a broken home. Other people might think that he was just born bad right from the very beginning. Snarky, just bad seed right from the very start. So really trying to understand Snarky, we're going to dive into his psyche just a little bit and try to understand why do we see these behaviors show up the way that they do. So I mentioned I'm a research geek. In the world of research, and there's a body of knowledge on research on incivility, I would say that there are 4 competing complementary hypotheses about why we see this rise of incivility in the workplace. First hypothesis is that we are experiencing a significant human cultural shift. We are changing as a human species. So the great 20th century philosopher Bart Simpson really captured it the best in a classic episode of The Simpsons. Bart was stung by a mosquito, a very contagious mosquito bite. So in the world of The Simpsons, what do you do around that? You encase the individual in a big plastic bubble. So Bart is encased in a big plastic bubble, to which if you've ever even watched 15 minutes of The Simpsons, he starts engaging in various Bart-like behaviors. His mother Marge does not like these different behavior, so she chastises him, to which Bart utters the immortal lines that have begun to define the 21st century. My bubble, my rules. We have become more of a my bubble, my rules culture. At least that's the hypothesis. We've become a more narcissistic culture. To go a little bit more scientific there. So narcissism comes from the Greek mythology of Narcissus, a young man who was very attractive, liked to look at himself in the water, wasn't worshiping the gods enough, so the gods turned him into a flower, the narcissus, so he could forever look at himself in the water. From a psychology point of view, narcissism, the over-obsessive sense of self, literally me, the universe. Me, 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 me. Let me tell you more about me. You want to talk about me? You want to talk about you? Great. What do you think of me? Very much that obsessive sense. Now, if you've never experienced that my bubble, my rules, or maybe you have, if you've ever been to the grocery store, standing behind the person who is talking just way too loud on his or her cell phone. Don't even get that there's another world happening around me. And we could argue various points of view about why we see this increase. Is it media? Is it disconnection in technology with each other? If you look at scientific studies of freshman college students today compared to 25 years ago, freshman college students today report 30% higher on standard measures of narcissism. We are becoming more narcissistic as a culture, and we're becoming more tolerant of it. The DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. We used to be in the DSM-4, now we're in the DSM-5. It's this book that clinicians use to diagnose mental illness. Narcissistic personality disorder, when the DSM-5 came out last year, was removed as a mental disorder. There is no such thing anymore as narcissistic personality disorder. Narcissism was relegated as a subtrait of other more serious disorders. We're just plain becoming more tolerant of people being focused on themselves, which should actually give us a little ray of sunshine. When Snarky engages in that little snarky comment or that little interaction, it wasn't personal. It wasn't directed at you. He just didn't even notice you exist. That was just, he was going on about his own world, so it wasn't personal. That should make us feel better, right? That, suddenly I engage you in the paper cut. You shouldn't take it so personally because it wasn't directed at you. I didn't even notice you. So maybe that, in one way, that should make us feel better. I don't know, try to find a little ray of sunshine there, right? All right, so second hypothesis. A little less gloomy than the first hypothesis. Second hypothesis is that we have changed in organizations. So while this is a little bit more researched around, the workplace, organizational settings, I think we can take a look at it in almost any setting as well. So second hypothesis, okay, human species has not changed. We're the wonderful people we've always been. Organizational climates have changed. Thus, we see more uncivil behaviors. And some of the research bears it out. Over 40% of us in today's workplace say that we no longer have time for the niceties. Over 40%. What are the niceties? Please and thank you. What are the niceties? A live sit-down telephone conversation or live sit-down face-to-face personal conversation versus the walk and talk, versus we need to do this over email or texted. I am one person now doing the job of 4 people. I don't have time. This isn't about trying to be narcissistic. This isn't about trying to be uncivil. I'm just trying to manage my world. And my boss has set a lot of individual short-term goals. So if I help you with yours, that's time away from mine. You're going to be fine and dandy. I'm going to get in trouble. So you know what? You take care of you. I will take care of me. Which in many cases, many of us have described the workplace in any sort of social setting as much more aggressive. That we've gotten much more dog-eat-dog. That it feels like the resources are getting smaller and smaller. There's only so many promotions, pay raises, FTE, whatever you want to define as a resource to go around. So I'm going to look out for me first and me only. You look out for you. Third component within an organizational context is now some of my colleagues at work who really know me, I might come across a little bit hypocritical with this, is the workplace has gotten a little bit more casual. I enjoy Jeans Friday as much as the next person. However, long gone are the days of formal interaction. None of my employees have ever called me Mr. Abbott. It was as I was meeting, it just only feels right to say Mr. Mayor. I want to call him Phil. My dad's name is Phil. But that whole idea of formality, we've lost a lot of that in today's workplace. Telecommuting, flex schedules, how people dress. Can you call your boss dude? Can we be friends on Facebook? Any of those different pieces. Now, I'm not against, I want to be really clear, the idea of flex schedules, telecommuting, a lot of the ways that we've made the workplace more casual have also allowed people who wouldn't have normally been able to participate in the workplace be able to participate. So we've really expanded and done great things as a function of some of the casualness. The problem with the casualness is that it blurs the line between appropriate and inappropriate. Suddenly now, if it's okay to do it at home, is it okay to do it, whatever it means, at work? If we have that kind of conversation offline when we're having drinks over the weekend or after work, why can't I make the same sort of comment when we're at work sitting across the table from one another? That informality has really gotten fuzzy about why we see this increase, and technology has not helped at all. And that's the third hypothesis, that one of the reasons we're seeing this rise of incivility is because of how much technology has impacted how we interact with one another on a day in and day out basis. One of my favorite quotes in the whole world is this one. Electric communication will never be the substitute for the face of someone who with their soul encourages another person to be brave and true. Charles Dickens, talking about the telephone. So any of this could have just been quoted yesterday as it relates to computer communication, text messaging, blogs, discussion forums. We've lost a lot of face-to-face communication with each other. And it's estimated that incivility due to a cyber environment costs U.S. organizations over $5 billion annually. When that explosion comes up in a cyber environment, lost productivity, lost time, the amount of people that need to be brought in to try to figure out who said what to who and track down that chain of emails, voicemails, texts, and all the productivity that gets lost as a function of those sorts of investigations and the misunderstandings that happen. It's boomed this whole new study of research called cyber incivility. Being uncivil to one another in a cyber environment, online. If you've ever been flamed, if you've ever received that email with the bold and the underline and the red letters and the increased font, and it's like, wow, and just the toxicity and the vitriol that's being spewed in this email, and you look at it and go, there is no way a living, breathing human being would actually say those words to somebody face to face. But because I had the anonymity behind the keyboard and got to type out all my thoughts and then click send, suddenly now that's okay. Now, if you've never been flamed, here's my invitation to you. Go to the Denver Post website. Go to the opinions op-ed section of the Post website. Go to the letters to the editor. Find a hot topic letter to the editor. Whether that be the protests that were happening in Douglas County, whether that be abortion, gun control, gay marriage, any of the different topics. Find your favorite hot button topic. Find one of those letters and then take the next step and click into the comments section. Oh, if you've never done that, you are in for a joyride. The level of toxic spewing that people call discussion is amazing. Now, I realize I'm getting up on a stump here. If this is my one form of communication, my dominant form of communication day in and day out, shouldn't be surprised now if I'm interacting with a living, breathing human being that suddenly I think that same level of discourse is okay. Because that's what I'm seeing modeled. I mean, we can take it back to my generation, late 80s, 90s, and whether it be Maury Povich or any of the talk shows of, who's the dad of, and, the fighting, and the Jerry Springer, we just have progressively gotten into seeing this model of what does it mean to have discourse with one another, to have dialogue, to have engagement. And if that's what I see all day, that must be what's right. So technology has highly influenced this, and it's created a sense of what's called disempowerment. If you've ever been on the receiving end of one of those sorts of emails or voicemails, suddenly you feel disempowered. If I respond back in the same way, I'm going to get in trouble. If I don't do anything, I'm being a doormat. If I forward it to my boss, I'm not taking care of my own issues. I'm being a child. If I send it to HR, I'm escalating. There's no win. I'm stuck in a box and disempowered. Even worse when these sorts of cyber elements come from a supervisor. And that's the fourth hypothesis, where somebody in a leadership, supervisory, managerial position is engaging in those behaviors with others. That's the fourth hypothesis, that those of us in leadership, management, supervisory positions haven't managed the stress of the past number of years as gracefully as we could have. And again, the data supports it. 1 out of 5 employees report feeling verbally harassed by their supervisor on a regular basis. Now, not illegal harassment. And, small aside, at least one anecdote from an EEOC commissioner, Equal Employment Opportunity Commissioner, report that over 97% of the claims they get don't rise to an illegal level of harassment. Most of those harassment claims are, I've got a mean boss. My boss yells at me. I'm being harassed. No, you just have a yelly boss. That's not illegal. That's not harassment. That's what this is referring to here. 1 out of 5 of us say that we feel regularly harangued, harassed, abused by our boss. So those of us in a supervisory managerial position oftentimes have to look at our own behaviors. Now, somebody doesn't even have to be a supervisor. All they have to have is power. Power in some way, shape, or form. And this quote from Abraham Lincoln, nearly all men can stand adversity, but if you want to test a man's character, give him power. So that could be the subject matter expert, that could be the elected official, that could be anybody who's got a level of power over somebody else. Now, most of us, I would argue, we wouldn't have survived as a human species if this weren't true. I believe most of us wear our power with style and grace. We exercise our power well. Power is not a bad word. Now, there's a book, and I get to curse here because it's the name of a book. The name of the book is called The No Asshole Rule. It was published about 5 years ago. Same idea of incivility, he just takes a little bit more of a direct punch at it. Now, the author within this talks about the subject matter expert. I would bet everybody in this room is a subject matter expert on something. There's something you know really well, better than other people. You've got your 10,000 hours in over the course of your life, and you are a subject matter expert on. I bet you all wear your subject matter expertise with style and grace. There are other people in the world who don't. And the author of this book has defined this individual as the talented jerk. So who is the talented jerk? The talented jerk is a subject matter expert who has learned 2 important lessons in his or her career. Lesson number 1, my organization needs me. I'm the only one who knows how to do this, whatever the this is. If I were to not show up to work tomorrow, they would be in pain. Lesson number 2, because of lesson number 1, I get to behave however I want. Because I'm the one with the power, other people need to bow to me. So I can behave however I want. And organizations begin to cater to this. Well, we can't afford to lose so-and-so. Well, that's just Evan. You're going to have to learn how to work with him because he'll be here long after you retire. You have to work with him. Or, maybe that's his job. He's not going anywhere. So what do some organizations do? They hire like an administrative assistant. Yeah, we'll get a buffer. We'll hire somebody to be the gatekeeper for Evan. Now we'll just find somebody with really good interpersonal skills, pay that person really well, and now only one person has to interact with Evan, and Evan can't terrorize other people. Now the problem here is other people learn the lesson. Everybody else in the organization, however you define organization, what do they learn? As long as you're good at what you do, you can behave however you want. And so whether it be from an employment setting or a group setting, it really is that place of we're going to hold both of these as equally important. I oftentimes counsel employers, you never want to put yourself in a position where one person is so valuable that they get to terrorize the organization. Nobody's that valuable. And everybody else learns the lesson. So we see Snarky, we've gotten a chance to look at his psyche a little bit. All of these different things, just like we have very complex personalities, so does Snarky. All of these different things begin to make up his profile. I do want to orient you to Snarky's rap sheet. What's he guilty of? He's guilty of quite a few things. Now, some of you might think Snarky is just a little bit of a misdemeanor, slap on the wrist, pay a small fine, brush him out the door. I want to try to convince you he is guilty of major felonies. Snarky needs to be locked away, because there are serious problems that come up with Snarky. Mentioned I like numbers. We're going to take a look at productivity. Incivility, Snarky, directly impacts productivity. Now, if you don't like numbers, I'm going to encourage you to go off to the beach, your favorite beach somewhere, and invite you back in about 90 seconds. I'm going to run through some numbers here for you. If you look at the research, when somebody has been on the receiving end of incivility, and you ask them, how did that impact you? Over 80% of us say that as being on the receiving end of the cutting comment, the sarcasm, the paper cut, I lost some productivity at work worrying about the issue. How much time I lost might be small, but 80% of us say we lost some amount of time worrying about that paper cut, that sarcasm, that snark. 66% of us say what just happened to me directly made my performance decline as a function of being on the receiving end of that uncivil behavior. 63% of us lost time trying to avoid the offender. I'm going to manage my day that I don't have to be in the same room with Evan. 63% of us lose some sort of time at work trying to manage the offender. And some of us take a very creative approach at this. 47% of us say that we intentionally decrease our amount of time at work. We come up with those very creative little solutions about why I suddenly need to leave work early today, why I need to come in late, why that shift won't work for me. I need to get out of here my kid's soccer game, or code for I can't stand working with Evan for another minute. So we actually decrease our amount of time at work. Now the numbers are going to start to get a little bit smaller, but I think they get more serious. 42% of us say that after we've been on the receiving end of incivility, we intentionally decrease the amount of effort we put into the work that we do. I could give more effort, but I got to put up with Evan. So I got to save a little bit for myself, because I can't give you everything because he takes work. 38% of us say we intentionally decrease the quality of work that we do. With what I had to put up with, this is as good as you're getting. I could give you more, not gonna. This is as good as it gets right here. We all are trying to innovate, learn new skills, do new things. When you compare individuals who work in the most civil environments to the least, compare that upper 10% and lower 10%, individuals who work in the lower 10%, imagine the worst organizations you could ever imagine being in. They report 30% less motivation to learn new skills, and when asked to innovate, come up with 25% fewer ideas. When asked to work on a team, after being on the receiving end of incivility, 25% of us say that we intentionally leave work for our coworkers to do. I could do it, but I'm going to let somebody else do it. And the last one, if you went off to the beach, I'm going to encourage you to come back, because I think this last number is the most important one. I don't even have to be on the receiving end of it. All I have to do is witness it. I see two employees go at one another in an uncivil manner in a store, at a facility, in some sort of interaction. I report being 50% less likely to do business with that system, that organization again. It impacts how I view that system by how people treat one another. So it has direct impact on reputation as well. So there are some numbers. What's another element that we see on Snarky's rap sheet? Snarky loves to create stress. So when we think about stress, that wear and tear on our bodies, it's estimated that incivility, physical issues, healthcare costs, it's estimated that we spend over $300 billion annually around physical issues related to stress. The number one workers' compensation claim is no longer standing on the table trying to screw in a light bulb or tripping over an extension cord. It's people reporting physical damage to their bodies, physical side effects as a function of stress in the workplace. So imagine being on the receiving end of the paper cut day in and day out, paper cut after paper cut, that one snarky individual, snarky just cutting at you day in and day out, that creates stress. Now, when we think about our human bodies as it relates to stress, it has a significant impact on our immune system. So if you're not familiar with this whole concept of fight or flight, under stress, our bodies are built in such a way that under stress, under life-threatening stress, blood leaves our brain and our central core, and it travels to our extremities, arms, legs, butt. We're flooded with stress hormone, cortisol, adrenaline, all to facilitate one of two responses: beat the critter down that's threatening my life, or run away from the critter. Now, in our primitive days, it served us very well. Big bear coming to eat me. Stress. Stress hormone, adrenaline, beat the critter down or run screaming away from the stress. Fast forward to 2014, those are two options that don't really work when I'm feeling stressed out in a city council meeting. Right? So here's this thing, and somebody's yelling at me. I can't beat them down. It's recorded, right? There are rules. And I can't run screaming out of the room. It's not functional. And if we're just plain honest, most of the stress we experience day in and day out isn't life that most of us experience. I think we have a random exception or two here in the room. Isn't life-threatening stress. What most of us experience are low to moderate levels of stress. Day in and day out stressors, traffic, workload. That is not high-level fight or flight stress. It's low to moderate. Now, our bodies work best under high stress because it tends to be shorter and we get in and get out of it. If you've ever been under prolonged stress, that low to moderate for a prolonged period of time, typically what happens to you after that stress lets up? Think back to school, finals. You go through that finals couples of weeks and you're studying and you're getting your stuff done. And suddenly finals are done, almost without fail, what happened? What was that? Party. So party was one. So then you party, and then what happened? Fall asleep, and then you woke up, and I heard a couple of people say, you get sick. That our immune system gets tapped when it's left under stress for too long. So under high stress, fight or flight, our body isn't tapped by prolonged stress. Low to moderate stress fully taps out our immune system, has devastating impacts on our cardiovascular system, has devastating effects on our ability to fight off minor infection. That's where we get exposed to the common cold constantly. We are more vulnerable to it when our immune system has been tapped. So think about being under that prolonged stress with snarky living in your world day in and day out. That has really significant impacts on our health. Third component is retention. It's estimated in exit interviews that 12% of individuals leave organizations due to uncivil treatment at work. And as people, sometimes we want somebody to go. More often than not, we don't. Turnover costs. Depending on the level somebody holds within a job, it costs anywhere from 30% to 400% of that person's annual salary. So it's a bottom line cost savings of being able to retain well-oiled, well-working employees, well-working workforce. And most common reason people cite leaving is their supervisor. Unproductive relationship with his or her supervisor. Now, I am going to kind of, even though I'm not an attorney, there is a little bit of legal risk as it relates to incivility. You can take the analogy of the broken windows theory of law enforcement. In law enforcement, why do law enforcement officers, or why does a community care about broken windows? Because it sends a message. If we don't mind broken windows in our community, and here's this, that's not being kept up, maybe we don't care about acts of vandalism, intentional acts of vandalism. And now it creates the slippery slope. If we don't care about minor crimes against property, what about major crimes against property, theft? If we don't care about theft, what about minor crimes against person? What about major crimes against person? What about abuse and violence? What about homicide? That it creates this slippery slope. Same idea with incivility in the workplace. In workforce studies of organizations, of systems that are okay with the minimally offensive joke, a little bit of curt tone. There's no law against a good blonde joke. I'm blonde, it might be receding, but there's no law against a good blonde joke. They're not nice, but they're not illegal. There's no law against being a little sarcastic, having a little bit of tone in your voice. However, in studies of organizations that are more tolerant around those things, they are more at risk for claims of harassment, homicide, workplace violence, and abuse. because you get a slippery slope. If the blonde joke is okay, what about the political joke? If the political joke is okay, what about the ethnic joke? What about the religious joke? What about the gender joke? And we just crossed lines a few jokes back, and suddenly things escalate and we are more at risk. And people who enjoy harassment-based behavior, and let's face it, there are some people out there, in those environments where we are tolerant of the minimally offensive joke, of the curt tone, those individuals are smart, they're clever. They have learned a whole new way to harass, and the literature calls it selective incivility. So, I'm not going to give you the quid pro quo. I'm not going to make the overt racial joke. I don't want to get caught like that. We are tolerant of curt tone or sarcasm. I'm just going to be a little bit more sarcastic to groups of people I don't like. There's going to be just a little bit more tone in my voice with that category of individual. The organization is already tolerant of it, so I'm not going to get caught. And what are you going to do about it? Prove that I'm somehow being harassing based on this. Everybody else does it. Somehow prove I'm focusing in on this. So this tolerance piece really becomes an issue. Last element on Snarky's rap sheet, you cannot talk about incivility without talking about the desire to get even, revenge. You can't talk about revenge without talking about Machiavelli. So if you've ever read any of your classic literature, Machiavelli, 14th, 15th century, Florence, Italy, advisor to the Medici family. Lots of writings about how one survives political court. You know, how do you survive out of the best? Machiavelli had a great quote about the idea of revenge. Treat men well. And I'm losing the quote here. No, it's not keep your friends close, but your enemies closer. Essentially, it's along the lines of treat people really well or utterly destroy them. For minor offenses, people get their revenge. So if you think about that from a political court point of view, treat people really well, they will treat you really well. Utterly destroy them, they can't get back at you. So very logical. Give somebody the minor paper cut, the minor offense, they will get their pound of flesh. They will get their revenge on you. So when we think about it here as it relates to incivility, we begin to see it play out here as well. In polls, on the receiving end, if you've been on the receiving end of incivility, what are you going to do next? 94% of us say we plan on getting even with the offender. Now, this does not have to be, I'll see you out in the parking lot. This could simply be, expense report, I lost that. Oh, you really needed that call back today? Couldn't get to you. Sorry. Minor paper cut. A little bit of revenge back. You treated me like that? I'll just kind of give you the little one up there. Even more disturbing, 88% of us say we plan on getting even with the organization. I'm going to take these pads of paper home tonight for my kids' school supply. Those are expensive. With what I have to put up with here, I earned those. So when we're talking about getting even with the organization, we're not talking about major acts of criminal actions. We're talking about little paper cuts back. So all of these begin to show up on Snarky's rap sheet. So now, just kind of here at this group level, this is going to maybe invite you to be a little vulnerable. Where might you see some potential impacts as you look at this with how you treat one another, how civil you are? How do those issues play out here with City of Littleton? Or what's the impact that you could see around civility with City of Littleton? It's kind of a vulnerable question.
Well,
yeah.
Go ahead and step out. On council, I think it's to our advantage to make the extra effort.
Why?
Because a lot of people don't care, But those that are looking or whatever, it does create an impression of what is appropriate. It's maybe the more kind of thing that you were talking about, or the norm rather. The norm. It's the norm, and by you trying to practice it and show it, hopefully it rubs off, and then you get to the issue of how you deal with somebody who's not dealing with it. but it really is a model role-setting thing. And I just want to say, a citizen came up to us at that meeting we had last week, and he said, I want to tell you, he says, whatever his story was with he says, this is the first community I've ever been to where you come to city council, and it's like everybody really cares. He said, it's like you really want to try to get things done and do the right thing.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it, but whatever we were doing was creating that impression there with that person.
Yes, certainly not on my rap sheet there, but reputation of an organization, of a city, of folks doing a job for a city, on a city council. How you treat one another influences reputation, how you're seen. Yeah. You had raised your hand.
Well, yeah, I mean, the only thing that I've seen is just being able to just sit back, especially on the boards, because chances are you're running with that person will be very rare. And so take that deep breath. Yeah. Think about that sentence before you say it.
Yeah. Other impacts of civility in council chambers, if you want to even make it that focus. Would you say other impacts that happen when you treat each other civilly? When citizens come in and they're speaking and they're being civil versus uncivil, what would you say are some of the impacts or actions that come up as a function of that?
When we're being civil?
Yeah, or uncivil. What would you say are some of the impacts of the snarky comment?
There was once a hearing where we only had one item on the agenda, and we had a lot of time.
Yeah.
And so I told the citizens I'm not going to run the clock. Just talk.
Yeah.
There's only 3 people. So,
I could run if I really wanted to follow the rules, I could run the clock.
and afterwards,
Not
they
done
came
it.
up and said, we appreciate that.
Yeah, it's great.
I think it's all part of like listen or lack thereof. I see it in myself and I see it in others.
Yeah.
You can tell in a meeting whether council or our board are really listening to a citizen or sometimes to each other. You can tell right away, the fix is in, you can tell. And that gets back to the community. That has a great impact on our community.
Well, even just, that me being able to speak in a civil manner, whether it be as a council person out or as a citizen too, allows me to be heard better. I might feel really passionate about something, and sometimes that passion might translate into a little bit of snark or the unfortunate cutting comment, but the more I'm able to manage that, the more I'm going to be heard. Not necessarily agree with, but heard. And oftentimes when we're talking about civil discourse, that's oftentimes as good as we get. Are we at least hearing one another? We might not have agreement here yet, but everybody's feeling heard in that moment. I don't know. Would anybody else put anything on the rap sheet? You could even take it out of the scope of here when you think about the cost of incivility, the cost of it. Yeah.
This was just a few years ago. We have some houses that are being built behind us, and that land's been vacant for 20 years. And so we wanted to ask that the houses be built there be single-family homes, like, one level, like everything else in our neighborhood is. So my husband went to a council meeting, and he brought this up, and he was complaining that, putting 2 stories up will completely block our whole backyard. And the response was, well, you can always move. Yeah.
Certainly doesn't
So
make you feel like a welcome member of that community.
He did not feel heard.
Yeah.
Right, so he runs around the neighborhood, of course, after that, telling everyone, well, there's no point in going to them, that's what they're going to say to you.
Well, and now so imagine had that turned out another direction. So your husband taking the direction of no point going, that's what they're going to say. Or does it become the next social movement that suddenly now, because of how we interacted with one individual, now we've got this big whole issue and a mob coming around. Like, that never happens, right? So even just those pieces of what sort of reputation are we sending about how people feel heard and just how open are the doors.
That's how you felt like they were very closed.
Thank you for sharing that example. I did ultimately remember the quote, men should either be treated generously or destroyed completely. For heavy offenses, they take revenge. For minor offenses, they take revenge. For heavy ones, they cannot. So you can just think about that principle, one end or the other. All right. So we have spent some time profiling Snarky. Who is he? taking a look at his rap sheet, and ultimately, should we be able to capture him? Should we be able to do something with him? Being able to reform it, put him through some sort of rehab program. Can he be a productive member of society again? Hopefully we don't have to keep him locked up. So much better if he could be productive. So, all sorts of rehab programs have steps. I've designed a program here for rehabbing snarky that has 3 steps. And I think you could say with any sort of journey, the first step is always the hardest one. And that is the whole piece of some self-management, managing our own inner snark. So if we're trying to manage incivility, where do we need to start first? I might need to kind of own that 99% number could be a little off occasionally. And are there some pieces where I might have to manage any of my own snarky behavior? So what could be some of that management piece? First one is a mantra. So if any of you have kids, if you ever saw Finding Nemo, the sharks, when they were going through the rehab program, they had a mantra. Fish are friends, not food. Same idea with incivility, and its coworkers are not competitors. Council members are not competitors. Colleagues are not competitors. They are my coworker. They are my colleague. They're not a them, they're an us. So much easier to be civil to somebody I see as an us, and so much easier to be uncivil to somebody I see as a them. So the more I can think about that collaboration piece, and maybe that's another topic you want to have at some point in time for your educational sessions of, what does it mean to be collaborative? Or what does it mean to come from a collaborative mindset versus a competitive mindset? Lots of fun topic there to be able to play with. So there's one element of managing our inner snark is a mindset. This person is a coworker, is a colleague. The next one, and this really goes to the point that you were making a little bit earlier, very oftentimes when we find ourselves in that moment where maybe I'm being triggered by somebody else's comment, whether that be, they shook my hand too hard, like I saw poor Ann's face when I shook her hand. It was like, ow, that hurt. He's aggressive. And so who knows the kind of comment she could have made back, and then there could have been a snarky comment back. If I'm not wanting this to get crazy or to get silly, first step is, can I really take the time to listen? Not just hear. And it's amazing. We're not really trained as human beings how to listen. We're trained, over our course of our lifetime, what does it mean to have a discussion, have a debate, have dialogue? But what does it really mean to listen? Many of us listen for just long enough that I'm pretty sure I know where you're going. And now I'm going to start to formulate my response so that way I can say my response once you take a breath. That's not really listening. If you've ever had that moment where you thought you knew where somebody was going and you cut them off and they said, yeah, that's not my point. I was actually going to make exactly that point. Would you please let me finish? Or, any of those different pieces where suddenly we stop listening. So what does it mean to fully listen? It means, can I put my opinions, my thoughts, my 2 cents on a shelf for a minute, put it in the back of my head, and give that other individual my full, undivided, 100% attention? Doesn't mean I've got to agree, but can I take them all in before I formulate my response? So it's really the idea of listening to understand rather than listening to respond. Next step in it is really taking a moment to think before I speak, which in much human culture, and especially the U.S. Western culture, means pausing. We might have lag or pause time in our interaction with one another. You said something, I now want to really reflect and think before I speak. Can I take what you said and now take it fully in and begin to craft my response back? But in much of our U.S. culture, when there's too much lag between somebody responding to something you just said, what's the story? Well, there's a lot of different stories we can write about why that lag is happening. What's going on in the silence? Somebody's sitting there thinking. What does that mean?
Breathe and listening.
Okay, so hello, are you there? It's like, yeah, I am here. I'm thinking. Processing what it is you want to say. But now because you're thinking, how might I interpret that? You disagree. Or you're giving me the silent treatment. You're trying to come up with that PC response. Would you just be honest? You're trying to spin right now. So stop spinning and just say what's on your mind. So if we can have a culture with each other where we do fully listen, and fully listening means, because I was listening to you, I need a moment now to craft my response back and to really be able to give you my best words. And that really is kind of the third component here with managing my own inner snark. Can I choose words that will facilitate the conversation, not escalate it? So facilitate, the root, facilis, from the Latin to make easy. So my intention is to choose vocabulary that will facilitate this conversation. I disagree with this comment. Does not have to mean, you don't know all the facts. I heard a group when they were going through when we were doing our What's Uncivil, where I can't remember which group it was, but it was somewhere on this side of the room, where kind of an experience of, wow, you're really stupid, or you don't know this content. You have no idea what you're talking about, so just sit back and listen. There is, so, boy, is that really going to get me anywhere? Anybody like to be called stupid? No. So can I find other ways to choose my words that will facilitate, that will make things easier, that will at least allow me to be heard? And the skill of giving feedback. Most of us use the term, I've got some feedback to give you, as a euphemism. And what we really mean is, I've got something I want to say to you, and because I said I need to give you some feedback, you need to sit there and just be quiet and just take it, because if you say anything back, I get to say you're not open to feedback. That's not what giving feedback means. If anybody here has an engineering background, feedback is a system. Something goes in, it's interpreted, it's fed back out. Feedback is not unidirectional, it's bidirectional, or it's part of a larger system. So simply by the act of giving feedback means I need to be open to receiving it as part of the system. That is a feedback element. It's not just headed out one way. So can I not only give the feedback in a way that can be heard? So I'm not going to jump to the fundamental attribution error. You are uncivil. You are not a good, you're not a good spouse. You make a mess of things, or you're not a good coworker. Notice all those fundamental attribution error labels attaching to personhood in those. Can I give feedback of, here was the behavior, here was my interpretation of it, here was the impact it had? I would love to hear more from your point of view of what that was about, and being open to that receiving end of the feedback. Last element here for the phase 1 of our rehab program is, now it might come across a little bit strong, it comes from that book with the curse word in it. And it's a philosophy here of, if I'm trying to manage my own inner snark, there are other people who are not on that same journey. They let their snarky freak flag fly. They just go crazy with it. Some of those people might be dear friends and colleagues. But if I'm really trying to work on my own managing of how civilly I manage my interactions with others, those are likely not the best people for me to spend my time with, because they're not going to be reinforcing the behaviors I'm trying to reinforce for myself. So while it might come across a little strong here, don't join the jerks, what it's really meant to say is, am I really choosing my company well if I'm trying to create a reputation of, if I'm really trying to manage it more, create a mindset of civility in dialogue? There might be certain people that don't really help that for me. Now, that's phase 1. I got to be able to do the good self-management piece. All of us can do that. Every citizen in our civitas can do this. The second stage is really more about what are we doing at a supervisory or leadership level. So for anybody in this room who supervises employees, you have an extra burden. For any of you who have a leadership role in your community, in your departments, in your groups, you have an extra responsibility of what are we doing that creates civility. What are the different components of this? Well, the first one is I better be a darn good role model around that. What am I doing to manage my own inner snark? If I expect civility in discussion at council meetings, but I'm the first one to cut people off, make the cutting comment, people are following more of the actions than they are the words. So it's really being able, can I be a good role model in those moments around civility? And the rest of it begins to follow the life cycle. So this is a little bit more built from an employer point of view. So what do you do first? So if I don't want snarky to work in my organization, really simple. Don't hire him or her. It starts during the interview process. It starts during the selection process. It's not just about the quote-unquote skills somebody has on their resume or how they do their work. It's about how well do they play with others as well. And I've got one little red flag that I always look for. And that is when I'm doing an interview and somebody says, I'm a good team player, but I really like to work independently, and I'm a good independent worker. Well, that's great. I want somebody who's a good independent worker and also part of a good team environment. Oh, yeah, I can be part of a good team, and I just prefer to work independently when I can, and that's when I'm most productive, and I can rely on myself, and that's really good. But I can do the team thing really well. That's no bueno for me. That is not a good fit, because almost invariably what happens later is they were trying to send a code. Later on, when they're assigned to some sort of team project and they don't want to work on that, what do they get to come back and tell me later? I told you I'm not a good team player. No, that's not quite what you said. I'm a lone wolf. I do things better by myself. Everybody else is too slow. They're not smart enough. Any of those different pieces, really being able to, are you hiring for civility? Are you hiring for that good team player? Are you hiring for how people treat one another? All of those become equally important. I also want to be able to set zero tolerance expectations. Now, this is a little bit in quotes. That it doesn't mean suddenly somebody throws out a little bit of sarcasm, they forget to put the oatmeal bowl in the dishwasher, you're fired. That's not what this means. What it does mean is, say, from a performance management expectation, we're going to have that conversation just as much as if you didn't show up to work for 3 days. They're both performance issues. We're going to talk about those. And I'm not going to see everything. So people might bring complaints to me. Here's an interaction I've had with so-and-so. I need to be able to take those complaints seriously. Be able to hear what's going on and not just write it off. Well, that's Evan. You should kind of learn how to work with his personality. And beginning to send a message there. And then the last one is, can I make sure to really engage in constructive dialogue? Not a finger-shaking session, not a diatribe, not a lecture. Can I begin to get into some dialogue about the issue, the topic, the interactions, how we talk with one another, how we interact, and do so in a civil manner? Third component of our rehab program is at the organizational level. So whether that be at the whole city of Littleton, whether it be the whole department, whether it be a whole work group, whole council, sometimes we can feel a little disconnected from this one. If I'm not the chief, if I'm not the supervisor, if I'm not the mayor, if I'm not the head of whatever, I don't control this. Here would be my small counter back to you. We're all citizens of our civitas. Every single one of us, by our day in and day out actions and interactions with others, influence the larger organization and the larger culture. I might not be the decider, but how I show up every day influences, and it becomes an aggregate. So what are some of these components that happen at the organizational level? The first, you all are demonstrating simply by what you do here, by having some of these educational sessions. You're skill building. You're taking a look at content areas. We could all be better at any of those different skills that we need when things get difficult. And that's when snarky tends to come out the most, when things get a little tense, when things are rough. So whether it be taking a look at this topic, whether it be taking a look at things like stress management, how do we manage stressful conversations, difficult negotiations that might happen, difficult conversations? By having a culture of skill building, you're demonstrating even one of those first organizational pieces that we could all stand to keep ourselves polished with how we interact with one another. The second is identifying systems. Do we have systems in place that reward snarky behavior? Does he or she who yells the loudest get heard? Does he or she who complains the most get the most change? Does he or she who steps on the backs of the most people get the promotion, get the resources? If we have systems that are rewarding snarky behavior, what gets rewarded gets repeated. So usually I mentioned this earlier, I'll mention it now. I am not so full of myself that I suddenly think that by delivering a 2-hour presentation on incivility, that there we go, there's the silver bullet, everything's bright and shiny and rosy, and there we go, everything is good. It's always my hope with this sort of piece that what it does is it starts conversation. That after this is done is when the learning really starts to happen. That you guys can begin to have a little bit more open conversation with one another about where does snarky occasionally show up? Do we have a few corners that he likes to hide in? Are there some places where we could polish and get better? How do we want to be? When do we want to be? What do we want to do around that? Which now also means, can we have really good conversations about, and some of them might be particularly difficult, do we have systems that reward this? And if we do, what are we going to do to fix that? What are we going to do to make it different? And can you study other examples? Are there other public entities out there? Are there other city councils? Are there any for-profit or not-for-profit organizations out there that you want to role model yourself after of who you are as a community? While you guys were on your break, I took a little moment there to read the we don't just have an amusement park, we have an amusement city, and some of those different pieces of how you see yourself, some of your goals and objectives. And are you studying other organizations, other locations that really care about having that reputation and having that connection with their citizenry? What do they do to have civil interactions with each other? And then the last one, really, as it relates to your culture, is how much are you really living your core values and your objectives? We can have really nice placards. We can have really nice wallet cards of here's our mission, here are our values. But how do we behavioralize those? How do those show up in our hiring process? How do those show up in our rewards process? How do those show up in expectations of just how we treat each other on a day in and day out basis? Have we taken some of those big fluffy terms and really turned them into actionable? What does that look like? Doesn't matter if you work at the DMV or Parks and Recs or your city council person. This is what this value looks like to us, and we're all held to the same standard. It's when organizations get to that level that they can really speak to their values from a behavioral place that they've made that shift. It's not just something that's on a piece of paper. They really mean their values. So we have we're getting close here to wrapping up our time together. Potential applications that anybody sees of maybe some of these 3 steps. Where do you see some opportunities to help rehab snarky? It's okay, you don't have to have an answer right now. It's 8:30 for you, or 8:25 for you, and 8:25 for me too. So I get that it's getting on a little bit later there. So we've had some time here to travel along and learn a little bit about Snarky, try to hunt him down a little bit, understand his profile, try to understand why he behaves the way that he does, what's he guilty of, his rap sheet. And I ultimately do believe he can be made a productive member of society again. He can be a good contributing citizen. And like anybody who experiences some challenges, he might violate his parole. He might fall out of his rehab, just like we spent 2 hours together. I don't expect all of you to hold it all in your brains. Some of it might have leaked out over the course of our time together. So thus you do have your materials that you can take with you. So hopefully you can continue on there. And should you not even want to dive in, the article in the back has some additional material and some additional thoughts. I've given you a few different quotes over our time together. If you remember absolutely nothing else from our 2 hours together, I'm going to invite you to remember this very last quote. It's cited by an individual who was talking about incivility long before I was and is much brighter than I am, Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin even had something to say about civility and incivility. Remember not only to say and do the right things in the right place, I guess you could say the PC thing, but far more difficult still to leave unsaid the wrong thing at the tempting moment. If we can remember that piece right there, odds are we'll navigate in and out of our relationships with each other just fine. So I want to say thank you to everybody. Happy to field some questions. We do have a couple more minutes here before things wrap up. Yeah.
What happens when snarky is rewarded by the legal system?
We work to change the laws? I don't know.
I mean, you just...
That's a darn good question.
It's just one of those where I guess maybe the last thing is the best thing. You just don't say anything. You just back off.
And that might have, sometimes that might have to be my choice. What do I have control over? What do I don't have control over? What do I have influence over? And can I differentiate those things?
Just a follow-up question. Are you talking about First Amendment rights in context?
Well, no, I mean, just when you think and we had one on the Board of Adjustment where we thought we had everything covered, and the lawyer came in, and it got nasty, and you said, okay, I thought we followed everything that we needed to follow, and I guess we did. So.
Well, I guess what I hear with getting the little nugget that I'm getting here, yeah, there's what's the law, but now how's that feedback being given to me? How are we engaging in that conversation? And I work in a legal environment, And I think at Mountain States, I think we've got a really good, I would hope, we have a really good reputation of we try to keep employers out of trouble. We try to coach employers around, try to have that productive conversation around the legal stuff. And so I think the same sort of advice would apply here. We can talk about the law and disagreements about the law and how something should have, could have, would have been done or what we thought we did right, but it can still be done so in a civil manner. It doesn't have to get toxic in that. And why it gets toxic, boy, there could be any number of reasons behind that.
I'm still trying to get my hands around why are there so much more snarkies in the world. Your hypothesis was that the species is going through dramatic changes. I think that's what you said.
That was one of them.
One of them. And I thought to myself, well, the species hasn't changed. Species is generally helpful, please, thank you, polite, just the general goodness in people. But maybe that's a criticism.
I personally believe that. I believe that too. Yeah.
But it's the society and the environment that's changing. Fast-paced, this, that, action. We want results, and there's a clash there that's making people unhappy, and therefore it brings out your snarky because you're under stress.
Where the various to kind of pull all that together is the variety of research. Why do we see a rise of incivility, of the cutting comments, of the how we interact with one another? Some people would say we've stopped caring about each other, the narcissism piece. Some people would say we've created an organizational system of pressure. Other people would say technology has really influenced how we interact with one another, and we've lost a little bit of that humanness. And other people would say those of us in power, however you want to define power, aren't modeling it the best of how we lead in a civil manner. I would say it's probably just like all of our personalities are an amalgam of a variety of things. I think you could take all four of those hypotheses and blend them together, and that's why we see some of this uptick in how we treat one another.
Evan, a couple of weeks ago we had a futurist that was here.
Oh, okay.
And he talked about generations, and he talked about after the millennials is what he refers to as digital natives.
Digital natives, okay, yeah.
The city has embraced and is utilizing some electronic feedback systems and communication systems that folks have with neighbors and to and from the city. I don't get to see the first level feedback on that, so I'm not sure if there's anything that's particularly snarky coming back. But in an environment where some can call it lazy and not doing that, but also in trying to respect the blended work life that folks are going through, sometimes it's the only way to engage folks. What have you seen in a modeling approach that comes through some of those electronic communications?
Yeah, I don't want to say I'm old school. I do believe, to the extent that you can, I'm going to back up here for a second. I'm addicted to my smartphone as much as the next person. So I'll own that. I'm a technology addict and geek, and the newest, latest, greatest thing that comes out, shiny. Want that too. So how we communicate via technology, that is something, all of us, that will continue to adapt to and work through and with. I am a firm believer of have the right conversation in the right modality. So if I go from a supervisory perspective, I should not be giving you feedback over email. It's face to face. It shouldn't even be over a voicemail message. Personal opinion. Now, take that out. So now I'm trying to engage the community around me. I'm trying to pull them in through various digital technology, discussion boards, forums, those sorts of things. Can those be done and moderated very well? Absolutely. Typically a culture in a community online where people start to manage one another about, hey, not cool, or that's not how we manage this conversation. Are there best practices? I guess it would have to be what sort of norms are you setting? What's being modeled around when a hot topic comes up? What does that momentum seem to be about what the community will allow in how we interact? You can have a different opinion. You can't start slamming people over the head. And so, what sort of community are we creating even online? And that you can't set rules about that. that emerges as a function of how people participate with one another in those environments and what's modeled for them in those. With the digital natives, they are so, what's fascinating about not only the millennials, because they're kind of the start of it, but then this digital natives piece, they've been raised on online communication. So oftentimes they are at much more of an advantage around that than us, of how they have some of those conversations. Now, some of us might have our shoulds about their grammar and how they frame words, and it's not even a real sentence, you know, any of those different pieces. But both of those generations also report high levels of collaboration skills, community. The millennial generation in like Pew Research Studies reports the most civic-minded since the silent generation. So they are more civic-minded than the baby boomers, more civic-minded than Generation X, caring about community and no one left behind. So I really do think that the millennials and the digital natives can maybe handle online communication better than, say, I can, because they've been trained on it since little kids about how do you have good dialogue online. Now, maybe where they sometimes suffer is how do you have good dialogue face to face. That's a whole nother conversation. Yeah. Personal perspective. We're a couple minutes over our time. I want to thank everybody. I hope it was a good evening.
Kevin, thank you. And for those folks, self-management and modeling sounded like the first two ways to deal with snarky. So
I would say so.
We can move with that. So thank you for traveling down this.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be here. Thank you.